this was a sadistic and brutal murder. Residents were terrified.
This poor woman was covered head to foot in bruises
and burn marks applied with a domestic iron.
It was just shocking. There's no other word for it.
He was a manipulative psychopath. He is a very dangerous individual.
She described him as a monster.
He's shown no remorse or no responsibility.
That level of evil demonstrates that he's a danger to any woman.
Just south of Derby city centre lies the bustling former village of Normanton.
It's a very multicultural area. People from all different parts of the world live there.
It really embraces diversity. I think at one time there was over 100 different languages and dialects spoken within that area.
It's also quite a close-knit community. A lot of people sort of know each other. Families tend to live quite close to each other, and they socialise in family and friend circles.
There's a lot of families that have lived there for many years, and as a consequence of that, people know each other's business and they're there to support each other when things might not go so well.
The communities sort of live together and work together. It does feel like a village in that environment.
It's somewhere that's always very, very busy, very, very vibrant, and there's always a lot of people on the streets, no matter what time of day it is.
In the heart of Normanton is Pear Tree Crescent.
Pear Tree Crescent has a distinct feel about it, and with it being on a crescent, it's quite contained. Families know their neighbours, and it's not a through road, so it's probably quite a quiet crescent without busy traffic going through it. So it's easy to see how it might have a community feel about it.
But life in this little backwater is about to change forever.
Emergency service.
The police received a call to say there'd been an incident in Normanton.
The report is in relation to an address on Pear Tree Crescent.
A man said that there was a body in the house.
So immediately the police were put into place. An immediate response to go to the address might be that they are not dead. So one of the fundamentals of policing is around protecting life.
Police go to the address on Pear Tree Crescent. They try to gain entry to the address. There's no reply there, so the decision's made to force entry. They force the front door because they're concerned about the safety of the people that may be inside the address. Once inside the address, they go upstairs and they enter the bathroom.
They found the body of a female in the bath.
The young woman is Asian and in her late 30s.
They find her in an unusual position. She is sat in the bath, she has got a towel over her, and she's got a shower curtain over her as well.
The shower rail had been pulled down and was lying on top of her or very close to her body in the bath.
And it was very quickly ascertained that she was dead.
And it was quite obvious to them that she had suffered catastrophic injuries.
This poor woman was covered head to foot in bruises. It was horrific, dreadful.
She has been savagely beaten around the head, face and limbs.
They will have been very quickly aware of the types of injuries that had occurred, and that, to all intents and purposes, this wasn't a natural death. It had been the subject of a violent assault.
And that this was a sadistic and brutal murder, and not just any other murder.
What the police did notice when they went into the bathroom was that the lock on the door was forced.
And I think that the police would have been weighing up the possibility that she had been trying to run away from her attacker.
She has been trying to seek refuge. She's tried to find a place in the house where she could go, where she could lock the door, and hopefully help would come.
Police descended on the street. They came from a number of police stations within just a couple of miles of the scene, cordoned off the road. I vividly remember forensics were on the scene extremely quickly. Residents were told to stay indoors. They were completely stunned and shocked by what had happened.
The scenes of crimes officers come in, unpeeling the layers of the crime scene, whether that's fingerprints, whether that's DNA. Things like the shower curtain would have been collected and bagged and tagged, taken away for further examination, etc., working through the crime scene.
As investigators carry out house-to-house inquiries, the top priority for police is to get a name for the victim.
It's the police who should be going and finding the family of that person and telling them their loved ones has passed away. What you can't do is allow social media or any other method of that person's name getting out before the family knows. It's incumbent on the police to get that identity at the earliest opportunity.
The woman identified as living at the property is 37-year-old Sobhia Khan.
I have a general recollection that she was, by all accounts, a terrific woman.
She was from Bradford. She had moved to Derby in the previous weeks.
She's worked with children for 4 years in Bradford, for young kids, as a play worker.
She was a very friendly, very kind and polite woman, having spoken to those people around her. She loved children. She had a huge passion for her job, had absolutely everything to live for.
A very bright, very intelligent young woman, but she was very family orientated as well.
Sobhia was loved and adored by her family. Her brother described her as the light of the family. She didn't have any children, but played a massive part in the lives of the children in the family and also those older members, and almost acted like the glue of the family. She brought a lot of people together and brought joy and happiness to those other people in her life.
And I think one of her life goals was to have children and, you know, to have a family of her own.
In a heartbreaking way, that was cut tragically short.
News of the murder comes on one of the holiest days for local Muslims, the beginning of Ramadan.
Residents were terrified. This is a sort of peaceful street in Normanton. It's quite well-to-do, quite respected street, and I just remember them being absolutely shocked by what was unfolding in front of them.
In Normanton, it would probably have the same effect as anywhere else. The community are justifiably shocked and, to an element, scared as well. But I think it's like a lot of communities where this type of crime takes place, that the communities kind of come together and rally round.
You don't get anything of this magnitude in Normanton, barely ever. Something of this scale, something this unique, is extremely rare.
The body is carefully removed and sent for a post-mortem.
The pathology report was horrendous and painted a picture of the most brutal murder possible. There was 36 injuries all over her body. It was clear multiple weapons had been used.
And these injuries haven't been inflicted in one go. They've been inflicted over a period of time. They involve burn marks, which are consistent with being applied with a domestic iron. There are marks where Sobhia has been hit with an implement. There's also blunt force trauma, which is feet and fists.
It was a very prolonged and systematic attack. It wasn't something that was very instantaneous, so this had been going on for some time.
Which must have been an absolutely awful experience to undergo. Just a terrible, terrifying ordeal that she's been put through.
The precise cause of death, as far as I can remember, was not ascertainable. She died from her injuries, this poor woman.
The type of person responsible for something like this is evil, sadistic, and without any humanity.
It was just shocking. There's no other word for it. It was just shocking. It was horrific.
In order to track this brutal killer, investigators continue to comb for clues left at the scene.
Police will try to work out exactly what had happened to Sobhia and and a murder weapon or weapons would have been high on their priority.
The physical search of the property is really successful. There's a couple of items that are found early on which are really helpful to the inquiry. There is a rod that is found down the back of a radiator. There is a piece of wood that looks like it may have been from a coat hanger,
which it was suggested was responsible for some of the injuries that she sustained.
As part of their search, police found a domestic iron that was found in a wheelie bin at the rear of the property.
And this is consistent with some of the burn injuries, and the distinctive shape of the iron matches the injuries that Sobhia has on her body. So the next concern for the police is who is the perpetrator for this. And the worrying thing is for the police at this point is that somebody may have committed a murder and they're out in the public and they're free to go and do whatever it is that they want to. If they want to flee, if they want to destroy evidence. So there's a real sense of urgency now to try and establish who the perpetrator is and get them under arrest at the earliest opportunity.
Investigators trace Sobhia's extended family who live nearby.
They speak to a man who is there. And it turns out that this man is the person who called the emergency services and tells them that an incident has taken place on Pear Tree Crescent. He tells the police that his brother had confessed to murdering Sobhia Khan. He is Sobhia's husband, Atwal Mustafa.
In Normanton, Derbyshire, 37-year-old Sobhia Khan has been found at home in her bath, beaten to death. Police need to trace her husband, Atwal Mustafa, urgently. He hasn't been seen since.
By this point, police have interviewed at length and thoroughly family members, and they would have concluded that Atwal Mustafa is the prime suspect. When I saw the photo, I sat there and I remember looking at it on my computer screen thinking, here is a woman who looks free, who looks happy, who looks joyful, who's got a whole future ahead of her.
Her family says Sobhia is considered very vibrant and outgoing. She's very keen on social media and socialising.
And that was not the sort of account that residents were giving me who were living nearby the house. That was not the sort of life that they had seen her live.
Investigators put Atwal and Sobhia's married life together under the microscope.
They established from the family that Atwal had met Sobhia in and around May 2016. It was around that time that she said that she'd met somebody and wanted to get married.
And she wanted to leave the family home at Bradford and go and relocate at Derby to be with this person. This came as huge news to Sobhia's family. They'd never met who this person was. They didn't know where he lived, what he did. And although they were happy for her, they were also very cautious as well, because they cared about her and they wanted to make sure that she was going into a supportive relationship, and they just didn't have that information immediately available to them.
During their courtship, Atwal decides to meet Sobhia's family in Bradford. But bizarrely, he does so undercover, posing as a social worker.
He turns up, identifies himself as Asif, and quite quickly Sobhia's brother starts to become suspicious of this man and wonders whether he is who he actually says he is.
I think what Mustafa was doing was using this as a ruse to try and check on the family, to see what sort of people they were.
He was very kind of secretive in terms of his background and who he was.
Sobhia's family in the days after put two and two together and realised that this man was not a social worker and was actually in a relationship with her. And I think that certainly gave them great concern and worry This was not something that she had done before, and I think it sparked a lot of fear among her family members that this was a path that she was going down.
And as a police officer, I then start to question, why would this person invent such an account to try and find out about another family in such a secretive, clandestine way? It does make you wonder what his motives are for this.
A few months later, in August 2016, Atwell tries to make his intentions towards Sobhia clear.
What Atwell does is he arranges then for his family in Derby to travel to Bradford to meet Sobhia's family. And again, this is all part of the two families getting to know each other.
The staffer travelled with the intention of trying to get their approval for marriage plans, and he basically came with gifts to try and woo them and persuade them, and he would do anything he could to try and get what he wanted.
He continued to court the family, to ingratiate himself within that family environment and win people over.
But Sobhia's family remain unimpressed with her new suitor.
Sobhia's family warned her that this was a terrible idea, and they tried their absolute best to say that going to Derby was a bad idea and that this man was not right for her. Unfortunately, she would not accept this and did not believe it.
Time passes by and we are into April 2017, and Sobhia contacts her friend who's a beautician, and she tells her the great news that she's going to be getting married and she's looking to book some treatments. So it seems to be quite an exciting time for her. On the 19th of April 2017, Mustafa collects Sobhia from Bradford and he takes her to Derby and they move in together.
When they came to get married at their home in Derby, there was hardly anybody there. The imam was a friend of Mustafa. It's clear that the ceremony was a sham.
It was a very small ceremony. It was very informal, probably not the sort of wedding that she had dreamed of. Her family were not there.
And there's a considerable doubt whether it can properly be described as a marriage. But she may well have believed that they were actually married because of this ceremony that he'd set up.
It was hidden, it was done very quickly, almost a feel to get the ceremony over with.
I think it was also a way of exerting control over her, telling her that she was now beholden to her husband. It seems that he suggested to Sobhia that when she joined him in Derby, she would become completely isolated from family and friends. It was clear that he wanted her relationship to be solely with him, and he was going to cut her off from the family.
Just a day after the marriage, all of her social media profiles were deleted.
And it's clear that this was his ongoing attempt and decision to isolate her completely, both physically and virtually, from her family and friends. She was quite a gregarious, outgoing, independent-minded person. So this points to the degree of control and manipulation that he was able to exert.
She finds herself in a strange city without that support network around her, and this is a really worrying event in the timeline.
Police uncover records of something even more sinister, which occurred that same day.
Sobhia presented at the Derby Royal Infirmary with abdominal pains.
There's no indication as to what that was, but I think there's certainly a fear that this was the start of a campaign of domestic abuse that she had started to suffer.
On the 1st of May, we see yet another worrying turn in this saga. Sobhia phones her family up and confesses that she's been having an affair. Now, A family aren't entirely convinced about this phone call, and what it seems is that somebody's in the background telling her exactly what to say. Bizarrely, a few moments after this phone call has taken place, Mustafa then phones up. He says it was all a joke and he's forgiven her and there's actually no problems. These clearly aren't the normal things to do during the course of a normal relationship. It really starts to demonstrate a pattern of controlling behaviour.
2 days later, Mustafa and Sobhia went to Bradford to see her family, and they were shocked when she walked in the house. She was wearing a full veil, a niqab, and hands and face were completely covered. This was something they'd never seen before. They didn't see it in their own family. She was very westernized, so this was really, really out of character.
This is a very, very different person, and it is quite clear that Mustafa has now got absolute control.
Sobhia then disappears off the face of the earth until her brother receives a disturbing phone call.
Sobhia calls her brother up, then starts accusing him of inappropriate behaviour when they were both children. Now, this has never taken place, and it's almost like Sobhia's reading from a script, and that Mustafa's in the background and she is just going through the motions of doing exactly what he wants her to say.
Sobhia's brother, during that call, got really, really angry to the point where he just threw the phone and said, "I'm not having this conversation."
She was clearly saying this, again, under coercion from Mustafa. And this seems to be a pattern where he is using her to make accusations against her family, a further attempt to split her off from her family. And again, it's an expression of his sadistic, aggressive behaviour to make her even more isolated and under his power and control.
Mustafa's own family tell investigators about the morning they discovered Sobhia was dead.
His mum said that she was terrified as to what Mustafa had done. He had come to her door and had asked her to come back to his house. She locked the door and did not want to go. His family members were telling her, "Do not go," which I think is very disturbing that that was going through their mind, and gives you an indication as to what they know this man is capable of.
But Mustafa persuades his mother to get in the car.
The mother goes to Petrie Crescent and she's directed upstairs.
And so she went up to the bathroom, not really knowing what to expect.
And sees Sobhia in the bath. She said to Sobhia, "Why are you taking a bath at this time?"
She asks her if she's all right, and it's at that point that she realises she's not conscious.
And there was Sobhia lying covered, head to foot in injuries.
And then she realised she was dead. Mustafa's mum confronted him and said, "Why have you killed her?" And he denied it. He claimed that she was just unconscious. She did not believe it. She knew what he had done. And she said, "You have killed her."
Atwell's mum breaks the news to his brother, who in turn calls the police. When interviewed by detectives, Mustafa's family reveal he could be hiding out at his uncle's house.
They tell police that it's an address that he may frequent. And that leads the police pretty quickly to go and visit that address. And they find Mustafa there, and they arrest him for murder.
In Normanton, Derbyshire, Atwell Mustafa has been arrested on suspicion of the murder of his newly wed wife, Sobhia Khan. Police examine her husband's movements in the last 24 hours before his arrest.
So What the investigation discovered subsequently is that Mustafa, from his relative's house, has used a mobile phone to contact his solicitor. He's then discarded that mobile phone, which is perhaps an indication of his intent to evade capture.
And then he's bought flights to Pakistan, clearly with the intention of fleeing the country and escaping the jurisdiction in the hope that he can evade justice.
And he finally phoned an ambulance to try and get what he said was help. I believe this was a cynical and twisted ploy to try and avoid responsibility for what he had done and cover his tracks.
The good thing that we have at this point is the person that the police believe to be the perpetrator is in custody, so any ongoing risk to the public is mitigated. But they're also under a lot of pressure now, because there's only so long that you can keep somebody in custody and interview them and start to build your case.
Investigators uncover that Atwell Mustafa has a sinister history.
He was, in fact, a psychiatric patient currently under psychiatric care and supervision who had previously carried out a serious offence.
They would have found an incredibly horrific case from 2008. This would have rang massive alarm bells.
Mustafa holds an ex-partner captive in his home for 4 days.
She was assaulted, raped, her underwear was set on fire while she was wearing it.
He tortured her, he did some horrendous acts to her.
He completely abused this woman. He repeatedly beat her. He shaved off her hair, he shaved off her eyebrows.
He mutilated her. He caused a wide range of injuries to her that were truly horrific.
All of this was while he was accusing her of falsely having an affair. It was an absolutely horrific campaign of domestic abuse on a truly savage scale.
She finally managed to escape from him. She ran to a shop where the police were called and he was arrested. This sadistic assault, which included a sexual assault, bore striking similarities to the subsequent assault and murder of Sobhia 9 years later.
Mustafa is arrested in 2008. The police investigation progresses and he goes to court charged with grievous bodily harm and rape as well. Mustafa pleads guilty to the grievous bodily harm.
He said that she had in fact provoked him and that he had been justified in attacking her.
But he denies the rape, so the case has to go to trial. And thankfully, he's subsequently convicted of those rapes. He's found guilty.
I spoke to his former partner and a support worker on her behalf on the day that he was sentenced, and it was clear, completely clear, that what he had done to her had devastated her life, had destroyed her, and had had a profound and disturbing impact on everything around her.
So again, during this investigation, there's the parallels between 2008 and 2017. You have this controlling, coercive behaviour where Mustafa is accusing his partner back in 2008 of being unfaithful, about having affairs. And this is the same behaviour that's then repeated in 2016, 2017 with Sobhia. And this is a really worrying development when the police find this, because he's done this before.
And it seems at the time of his sentencing, Mustafa has a trick up his sleeve.
Following his conviction, Mustafa started to display psychiatric symptoms, none of which had been evident prior to the offences. He had no psychiatric history, but he managed to persuade psychiatrists that he was suffering from paranoid schizophrenia, as a result of which he was not sentenced to prison, and he was admitted to a secure psychiatric hospital rather than being imprisoned. This meant that his care was now under the supervision of psychiatrists, and he could be released after his mental illness, if he had one, had improved without any need to go back to prison.
At the secure unit in Nottinghamshire, Mustafa starts planning his path to freedom.
Quite early on, you start to see the seeds of what is manipulative behaviour there. You start to see that he's trying to ingratiate himself to staff, he's buying gifts, and he's mainly trying to portray this image of being a model patient.
He started to do some work on the farm shop there, and he felt that this was a way to try and sort of reintegrate into society and come across as a sort of normal, ordinary guy, and actually hide his true nature.
And again, this is all about him trying to prove to the staff that he can be trusted, that he can go and interact with members of the community, and in actual fact he presents no risk whatsoever.
Mustafa is moved to a lower security unit in Derby to start a sex offenders treatment programme, which was a requirement of his sentence.
He was moved nearer his home, where he manipulated the system again by suggesting that he had already carried out treatment programs which he had not done.
He was supposed to take a program for sex offenders. Somehow he managed not to do that. He hoodwinked the system and got out of it.
He's probably 25 minutes walk from his home address on Pear Tree Crescent, so he's getting even closer to his home, and he's managing to convince the people around him that he's no longer a risk.
His escorted leave, where he goes out with staff, is changed to unescorted, so he's allowed out on his own, ostensibly to go to Friday prayers. So again, he's manipulating the system. He's persuading staff to let him out unescorted because they believe that he's no longer showing any symptoms of illness, whereas in fact he still remains a dangerous, psychopathic, personality disordered individual.
Atwell's unescorted leave is meant to be spent with his family, but left to his own devices at home, he has other plans.
He had formed a clandestine relationship with a member of staff who was there to look after him. This was strictly against the rules that he had been set because he was supposed to inform the authorities of any relationships that he was forming.
And it was following her disclosing to her employers that she'd had this relationship. She also identified his aggressive tendencies, his manipulative, his threatening behaviours.
With a healthcare professional, he tells her that her phone is bugged, he threatens violence, he seeks to control her, it's really coercive behaviour, and it's brought about by this jealousy that he seems to have.
It would have meant the end of her job, but such was her fear and the level of control that Mustafa had started to wield over her, she felt she had no choice but to come clean.
The healthcare assistant is fired for gross misconduct, and Mustafa spreads unfounded allegations of inappropriate behaviour with other patients.
But interestingly, again, what he was able to do is manipulate his position in that relationship to demonstrate that he was the victim.
These are massive parallels between what he had done with Sobhia. It was just a pack of lies, and it was deceitful, and he was hiding the truth and using any way he could to do that.
Mustafa is discharged just months before meeting Sobhia. In spite of an order to inform the authorities of any new relationships, he fails to do so. As detectives build their case against their suspect, they uncover more damning evidence.
As part of the police investigation, they found a recording on Mustafa's phone from the 18th of April.
The conversation was between Atwell, or Mustafa, and Sobhia, and within that conversation he was saying how she was stupid, she wasn't intelligent, really belittling her.
He'd been incredibly nasty and abusive towards her intellect and her family. and this was an important piece of evidence.
The recording is dated just 4 days before their wedding.
This, I think, is a disturbing insight into what he is like as a person, and shows the sort of control and dominance and violence that he's later uses and was using at the time.
Investigators also uncover more worrying information in police records.
In October 2016, the police receive a safeguarding referral. And this referral is in relation to a young girl who fears that she will be victim of honour-based violence with respect to her uncle. And this uncle is Mustafa.
Detectives bring together all their findings on Mustafa.
The investigation team managed to get together a compelling case at this early stage. There is good witness evidence, there is good circumstantial evidence, and what they're able to do is convince the Crown Prosecution Service to charge Mustafa with murder.
Atwell Mustafa has been charged with the murder of his newly wedded wife Sobhia Khan at their home in Normanton, Derbyshire.
So following his arrest and charge, Mustafa was remanded into HM Prison Nottingham, where he started to show very bizarre behaviour, because he was trying to get himself transferred to a psychiatric hospital, and he was trying to lay the groundwork for a psychiatric defence. He knew the system, and he wanted to try and plead guilty to manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility, claiming that he was mentally ill at the time, rather than be convicted of murder.
And a couple of months later, at his first court appearance, he pleaded not guilty to that murder.
Forensic psychiatrist Philip Joseph is asked to prepare a psychiatric report on Mustafa for the prosecution.
I was instructed by the Crown Prosecution Service to go and interview the defendant at the prison in order to determine whether there are any psychiatric factors which were implicated in the commission of the alleged offence. When I first met Mustafa, he told me that he hadn't expected a visit from me, although this had been organised with the prison authorities and his solicitor. And he then suggested that he remembered me from 2008, which was not correct, and may have been his attempt to give the impression that he was rather confused about the situation. He did, however, present as quite calm and cooperative, although later he appeared to be very distressed. For example, he was begging me to allow him to go to Sobhia's funeral with what appeared to me not at all genuine distress. I felt very strongly that he was attempting to manipulate me as well and present himself as a mentally ill, harmless victim of the situation. When I interviewed him, he was at pains to suggest that Sobhia was the one who was making the running in the relationship. She had suggested they get married, she had wanted him to meet her family, and she was totally in control of the relationship, and he was going along with it. Mustafa told me that in the period leading up to the killing, he was quite upset at Sobhia's behaviour, the fact she was going online and talking to other men, that at times he didn't know whether he was taking his medication or not, sometimes he forgot, and he even suggested that Sobhia had advised him to stop it, which is highly unlikely.
Mustafa also claims he suffered amnesia on the day of Sobhia's murder.
So he told me he had no memory of killing her, but he does appear to remember things that put him in a better light. For example, that a man had come to the house whom he believed his wife was having an affair with, and also a memory of calling an ambulance. This selective memory also suggests that the amnesia is not genuine. I formed the opinion that he was a manipulative, dangerous, sadistic psychopath who was prone to excessive jealousy when in a possessive, controlling relationship with a woman. I was fairly confident that he was not mentally ill at the time of the killing, that he had never suffered from schizophrenia, and that he had no psychiatric defence to a charge of murder.
The trial finally begins against Atwell Mustafa. He continues to plead not guilty to Sobhia's murder on the grounds of diminished responsibility.
The first day of the trial at Derby Crown Court was truly harrowing. The full scale of the abuse that Sobhia had suffered was laid out at the prosecution opening of the trial. I vividly remember the victim's family attended court and had to listen to all of that harrowing detail. And it was truly shocking what had happened.
The jury's taken through the 30-plus injuries and torture that Sobhia suffered, including the burn marks meted out on her body with an iron.
My first thought was, this man is a monster. The way in which he carried himself, the way in which he conducted himself with real arrogance and an air of superiority over the whole process, which I've never come across since.
Mustafa's team mounts his defence.
Mustafa tried to present a case that he wasn't fully in control of what he did.
We weren't suggesting that he hadn't committed this atrocious crime. We were suggesting, principally, that he had a serious mental problem. But the doctor for the prosecution took the view that he was not suffering from an abnormality of mental function, which provided him with a defence.
The jury went out to deliberate, and just 15 minutes later there was an announcement on the tannoy that they had come back with a verdict. That verdict was guilty.
Atwell Mustafa is jailed for life with a minimum of 33 years.
Mustafa laughed as he walked down to the cells. He'll be 69 before ever being considered for parole.
Sobhia's brother, who asked not to show his face, gives his reaction to the sentence.
I'm supposed to protect my family. I wish I could have done something to stop it from happening. But he managed to play the system, he managed to dupe these people. I'd rather them learn from this, knowing that there's people out there that can manipulate and do what he's done to my sister.
A 6-week inquest later rules there were extensive failings by the authorities managing Mustafa.
I think the impact of the murder will remain and has remained with that community for many years to come. It's one of those shocking crimes that happened on an ordinary street in an ordinary city in Great Britain, but the ramifications have been huge.
If you have been affected by any of the issues raised in this programme, help is available online at sky.com/viewer support.